Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us. If it's anything like here is today in Perth, it's 15 degrees. There's about an 8-metre swell offshore. Can't go fishing. What do? This is what I'm doing. These are our super deep rigs. Really hard to tie when you're offshore and the boat's moving around and you haven't got the right tools. So this is what I do when I'm thinking about fishing. I'm probably watching some of you guys on YouTube fishing out there, getting excited. I'm sitting here making rigs as I'm watching. So I'm just going to show you how these rigs are made, the components that go into it, and the easiest way to do it. So these have sort of changed over time to their finished stage now, which we've tried and tested both locally in Perth and also when we go up north to places like Coral Bay and Exmouth, fishing for what you've probably seen on other fever videos, the big ruby snapper, which we come across a lot of sharks. So we do change this rig a little bit depending where we're fishing. The one we're making today is what we use for super deep off Perth with the full Lumo sleeves. Okay, stay with me. Let's work through it. So there's two different forms that we use this rig. So locally in Perth, we use a full Lumo dropper. So this full Lumo dropper, really abrasion resistant. Obviously it's Lumo, so it's going to glow underwater. So we're fishing 300 plus meters or 900 feet plus. We don't have many sharks here, so there's not too many times that we pull up a grey band or a harpooker and we get sharked. And a lot of the sharks we do come across, they're quite small. You know, the green-eyed sharks, which everybody hates, they're a bit of a nuisance. But these rigs, very, very strong, very effective. When we're fishing up north, we don't use this Lumo sleeve. We use a much lighter grade of nylon line. And the main reason there is that sharks can bite it off. We don't want to be pulling sharks up 200 metres and we don't want to waste an hour of fishing time pulling up that shark. So this way, when they can bite that off, it releases them, off we go. We pull up our gear, still 2 hooks attached, maybe even some fish attached, and we get our sinker back. So that's the main reason why. So now let's have a look and see what these rigs can actually do.
There's a probably 10, 12 kilo plus, or probably a bit more, I reckon. And they're all... Oh, how's that?
So let me walk you through what we're using. First of all, we've got our crimping tool. So this is for crimping and also cutting nylon. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. We've got a range of circle hooks, 8 to 10. So when you're putting baits down that deep, you really want to use those circle hooks to make sure the fish stays connected. We've got metal crimps. So there's no knots tied in this rig. Everything is crimped. Really important to make sure that when you buy your line that you get the crimps to match exactly with your line, because you need to be able to double that over pretty easily. You don't want to have to force that, otherwise it can make it a really tough job or the job doesn't happen at all. We've got some Lumo that I've already pre-cut. Heavy gauge 3-way swivels. So these aren't a 3-way swivel that comes off the center. These sort of hang down from the top. I always use them this way. It keeps the droppers away from the main line. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. We've got standard heavy gauge swivel. This is to connect to our main line. We've got a Lumo sleeve. Now this is going to protect our dropper and go over the crimp near the hook. So first of all, we're going to do our droppers. We're going to make 3 droppers. The idea of these droppers is so that when one hangs from the top and one maybe floats up from the bottom, that they can't connect and tangle up that rig. When you're dropping these baits down 300 meters, the last thing you want to do is tangle up your line. So we're going to make sure that that's impossible with this rig. So first of all, we're going to make our droppers 300 mils long. Okay, so let's make one of our droppers. So I'm going to start by making 3 of these droppers first. So we're going to start with a 300 millimeter or 30 centimeter piece of nylon. I'm going to start with a crimp, sliding onto the end. We're going to start with one of our 1 inch or 25 centimeter Lumo sleeves and our hook. And we're just going to place that through there. That nylon and Lumo sleeve is going to bend just like this. So hopefully I don't stab myself. And we're going to feed that back through the crimp. So what you'll notice with this crimp, the nylon is only just coming through, maybe 2 or 3 mils there. That Lumo sleeve is completely covered through to the hook. So now the important bit, we need to crimp this. So this has 2 different stages. You can see the worn sections in these pliers. First, we're going to start with the one right at the back here, and we're going to crimp that 3 times along the length of this crimp. So that's 1. That's 2. And that's 3. It'll be quite firm. You can see the result of that. Now what we're going to do is use the second size just to make sure that that's crimped down as hard as we can. Okay. So there we have the first part of our crimped rig. So let's move on to the second part, which is our Lumo sleeve. Now this can just be fed down that dropper line. Now what we're going to do is just push that completely over that crimp all the way down to cover to that Lumo. So fully Lumo, fully protected. Now we've just got to do our attachment at the top here. So like we did before, crimp on, Lumo sleeve, and 3-way swivel. So this part, this is really important that you attach it to the right part of the swivel. So this is going to be your main line, top and bottom, and this is going to be your dropper. So we're going to use the dropper from the top. Put that through. We're going to bend that through our crimp. You can see that coming through now. I'm just going to keep pulling that through. And there we have it. So now what we're going to do, same process with the crimping, 3 crimps in the bigger size of the crimping tool. 1, 2, 3. And we're just going to size down just to make sure. Okay, so the excess nylon that we've got here, this is where we can just use our cutting tool and just cut off the excess. And there we have our first dropper. So the next part, I've prepared 3 lengths of 900 mil, so 0.9 of a metre. So if these are 300 millimeters long and this one's 900, if we attach one at one end and one at the bottom, we should, in theory, have a gap of 300 mils in between. So these hooks, they can't touch each other. So similar technique to the way we did the hooks, we're going to use crimp, Lumo sleeve. So for the nature of this rig, the main line, the sinker, is going to be attached to the bottom of this swivel. So when we crimp this, same way as we've done the other crimps, go. So that's going to be the top of our rig, that's going to be our main line, and you can see how that swivel just makes it hang away from the main line. So we don't use any Lumo sleeves over the main line. In theory, it shouldn't get any pressure. Now we're going down to our second dropper. So we're attaching this to the top. Crimp, Lumo through the top. There we go. So now, if I extend the bottom dropper and the top, when they're under pressure with the sinker on, they're not going to touch each other. Okay, one last dropper, crimp, Lumo, so try and get this similar length to the crimp when I put it through. So I'm just going to shorten that just a smidgen. So you can use the same technique with wire too. So if you're making rigs for lures or just big floating rigs or any sort of rig where you might want to use wire, if you're fishing for Spanish mackerel or wahoo, this crimping technique is really, really good on the heavy gauge stuff. Just make sure when you buy your line, you buy the crimps at the same time and you try and just make sure you can double over inside that crimp without too much effort. Because I have bought them separate before, got home only to find the wire passes through once, but really, really hard to pass it through, and it's a nightmare trying to make rigs when it's hard to get through those crimps. Okay, so we've got our third dropper going onto the base of this now. I'm just going to double check that that's the way down. Dropper's coming off the top of that swivel, I'm going to continue that all the way down. Crimp, Lumo, so we're using 3 droppers on these rigs. We don't always fish 3 droppers, and it really depends on what our bag limits are and where we're fishing. Obviously, dropping baits that far down, you don't want to be winding them in too often, so you want to make sure that you've got baits in that target area while you're finishing your drift. But sometimes, like in Perth waters, our bag limits for greyband are only 2 fish. So if we've got 3 people on board and we're dropping 2 lines with 3 hooks, there's a chance that we could catch 6 fish with 1 drop, which it hasn't happened before, but it could happen, and it has been pretty common to catch 2 at a time. So you can make this rig just with 1 dropper or with 2. What I have seen is because of the effect of the Lumo down deep, you can actually catch fish on hooks with the Lumo with no bait at all. And they are just attracted to that Lumo. So if you're close to your bag limits and you don't want to hurt these fish, because once you pull them up, you can't release them. A lot of the fish down that deep suffer barotrauma. So you don't want to pull up any fish that you're not planning on keeping or eating. Okay. So that's the very bottom. That's our middle hook. And that's our top hook. So what I do also use the dropper that I attach the sinker with, I use a lot lighter gauge than this 600 or 1,000 pound mono. So I'm likely to use a 100 pound mono to attach to the sinker. So the sinker's pretty heavy, they're about 3 kilos. To go and buy them from the shop, Australian, they're about $35, which is about $25 US. And you don't want to be losing too many sinkers. However, sometimes the sinker's the bit that gets caught on the bottom. So if you're going to lose part of that rig, it better be the sinker than the 3 hooks and also possibly the fish that you're winding up. So that's the reason we use that 100 pound line. I don't attach that to this rig. I do that when I'm out in the boat. Often that's 3 to 5 meters long also. So this rig, when it's hanging in the water, it's 3 to 5 meters off the bottom, which we find is helpful to avoid getting green-eyed sharks sometimes. But also too, these hooks, you don't want to get these snagged on the bottom, because a 1,000 pound mono, there's no way you're breaking this off in 400 meters of water or 1,000 feet of water. It's very, very difficult. So ideally, if you do need to break something off, it's going to break off at your sinker line, which is that 100 pound line. And hopefully this is all released. Okay, so the last bit we're going to attach to the top of the rig, and this is going to be the bit that we're going to attach to our main line. So this is done with, I'm going to say 450 mils of nylon. So same technique we've used for attaching all the other joins. There's our top. Guess the amount of nylon we need to fit through that crimp perfectly. Now, there's only so many crimps that you want to be doing with your hands. This is, I know it looks pretty easy on video, but it's hard work using this crimp. If you're doing this 50 or 60 times, soon enough you're going to get sore hands. But when it's 10 meter swells out there and the weather's pretty ordinary, this is it's a good time to make these rigs. I've just set up on my kitchen table at home. This is definitely not something I want to be doing offshore. in 2 metre swell, especially when the fish are biting. So yeah, make sure you do this at home in those downtimes. When you're thinking about going fishing, or when you're watching YouTube, watching somebody else fishing, sit there and tie rigs at the same time. Bit of fishing meditation. So for this top line, I'm just going to use a little Lumo bead. And now we just want our single swivel. So we also do use flashing lights when we're fishing deep. These aren't very expensive. They're maybe $5 each. Readily available, buy them online or at the commercial fishing outlets. Single swivel. So what I normally do with my main line, I'll use a 80-pound braid on my Shimano Beastmaster. That braid I'll have onto a heavy gauge clip swivel. So I don't normally leave anything attached to that, but I can just clip on the different rigs out there. I just find that really easy if you're changing species, or if you've got a few fish already and you don't want to pull up extra fish, you can just clip on a different sized rig. Or if you're chasing a different species, a rig with smaller hooks on it possibly. So the hooks that I'm putting on here today, this is normally what we'd use to chase greyband and harpooker, big snapper. You do catch like nanagai or big eye red snapper using similar hook sizes. They're that prolific, they still do get caught on here. Most common baits we're using on hooks these sizes, you might have seen me using herring, blue mackerel, also some large whiting frames, octopus, squid. All of that's going to work really well. You can see it's an octopus, or it's a circle hook, so it's got that barb heading inwards. Fish catch themselves, corner of the jaw. Makes it easy when you get them on board to just undo that. Yeah, but really reliable, and often fish catching themselves on hooks like that. Okay, so from the top, we've got our swivel running down with our bead to our first dropper. Second dropper, and third dropper. And from the bottom of that third dropper, that's where we can attach our 3 5-metre, 100-pound nylon, which I just tie that on the day, depending where we're fishing and what the ground's like. All right, great. If you've got any questions, just send it through the link. Also, if you like any of the content that you see in these videos, click the like button. What I've learned recently is that if you can click that like button, it sends this information, these videos, to other like-minded fishers too. So it makes this content really easy to find, and hopefully you get something out of this video. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.